But now I'm going to move on first, at least, to give a synopsis as best as I can on Kafka's The Castle. So we begin with a man. He's supposedly a land surveyor. The man's name is K, much like the central character from the trial. K is, however, a different character from the character that was in the trial, and he enters into this village that he's never been to before. He goes to an inn to get some sleep, and he's told that he needs a permit from the castle, Castle West, the castle is called, in order to spend the night in town. Kay says he's been invited by the Count West, to work in the village as a land surveyor. Kay finds that most people seem to have great faith in the castle and the way that it organizes the way that things happen in the village, much in the same way that people have faith in the legal system in the trial, even though in that book, nobody seems to know exactly what's going on. They nevertheless, those who know about this legal system that Kay is ensnared in the trial, seem to have faith in that system. The next day, back to the castle, Kay makes unsuccessful attempts to get to the castle. He runs into a schoolmaster who tells Kay that there's no difference between the peasants in the village and the castle up on the hill. He goes to a tanner's house, man named Lasman, but he is soon thrown out. He meets his two assistants, Jeremiah and Arthur. Jeremiah and Arthur look exactly alike. They are also, as the book goes on, they seem to be idiots who only really serve kind of as comic relief to constantly infuriate Kay. Kay then returns to the inn, having been unsuccessful in his efforts to get to the castle. Then a messenger named Barnabas brings Kay a letter saying that his immediate superior is the mayor, and the mayor will give him details of his job. The letter, however, was written by a man by the name of Mr. Clam. Mr. Clam is a castle director who also says in the letter that he will be, quote, keeping an eye on Kay. Kay takes a liking to Barnabas, the person who delivers him the letter, and it kind of thinks that Barnabas is going to be maybe an in to get him into the castle. And as Barnabas leaves, Kay decides to follow with him, thinking that Barnabas is going to walk him to the castle, but in fact, Barnabas simply walks Kay to Barnabas's home, where Kay meets Barnabas's family. Barnabas's sister, Olga, then takes Kay to an inn where he meets Frida, a barmaid who turns out to be Clam. Remember the guy who wrote the letter? Turns out to be Clam's mistress. And at this point, it's looking like Clam is really Kay's only serious connection to the castle. Kay and Frida, however, become intimate that night at the bar, and she decides that she's going to leave Clam for Kay. This upsets, in particular, the inn's landlady, who herself used to be Clam's mistress and still has enormous respect for Clam. She tells Kay that Clam doesn't even speak to people from the village, never has done, and in fact, it was Frida's greatest honor that he used to at least call her name, an honor that the landlady feels that Kay took away from her. But now Kay is intent on marrying Frida. He then has a meeting with the mayor, who says that it was a mistake that Kay was invited to come to the village at all, that in fact there is no need for a land surveyor, but they'll look into it. Kay then gets offered a position as the janitor at the school where he would live, and Frida persuades him to take the job. So he and Frida and these two oafish assistants decide to move into the school, take up residence there. Now, during the first night at the school, it gets so cold that Kay breaks into the shed to get wood. And it's at one point, Kay wakes up with one of the assistants lying beside him, and Kay punches him. The next day they wake up, the teacher and the class have walked into the room where Kay and Frida and the assistants are sleeping currently, and tell them that they need to get out while the class is going on. Kay almost immediately gets fired when they find out that he broke into the shed. Now, he refuses to leave, but he does fire his two assistants and throws them out of the classroom, locking them out. Kay then goes to Barnabas's house again, seeing Barnabas to be a connection to the castle. But he learns that even though Barnabas works at the castle, he's really not privy to its inner workings. There's then a very long section of the book where Olga, Barnabas' sister, talks about her family's downfall, how they were once an important family in the village, but they lost everything after her sister, Amalia, refused the advances of a castle official, a man named Sortini. She refused his advances in a very sort of public way. He sends her this letter, which, according to Olga, was written, I'm quoting, was written in the most vulgar language, using expressions I'd never come across before. And Amalia tears it up and she hits the messenger who brought it. And then the whole village at that point turns their back on them, and they essentially become outcasts and they fall into poverty. Kay is somewhat touched by this story, but then he leaves the home where one of his old assistants is waiting to tell him that Frida has left him, because Frida believes that Kay was having an affair either with Olga or Amalia, whom she despises like everybody else in the village. As you recall, that family has been shunned. Then Kay finds out that he's been called to the inn to meet with this guy named Erlanger, who is Clam's secretary. Now, he ends up being kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And while waiting, he gets really tired. He enters this room where he meets this guy named Burgle. Burgle, we don't get much clarity on, but we get some idea that Burgle can actually help Kay in all of the troubles he has been experiencing so far. But as he is telling Kay this, Kay falls asleep and doesn't really hear what Burgle has to say. And that's really essentially all that happens. He does end up getting the meeting with Clam's assistant, Erlanger. Erlanger simply tells Kay that Kay has to make sure that Frida goes back to being a barmaid. And then the book ends naturally in mid-sentence, because like every book that Kafka wrote, and I believe he only wrote 3, The Trial, America, and The Castle, and none of them are finished. But they're all unfinished in different ways. The Trial is unfinished, but it does have a final chapter, because when Kafka started writing it, he knew he had this propensity for not being able to finish things. So he wrote the first chapter, and then he wrote the last chapter, and then he started writing all the parts in between, which he didn't finish. So we do have that last chapter, but we do have probably quite a bit of empty space in between the penultimate chapter and the final chapter. With this book, however, it ends literally mid-sentence. This is the final sentence of the book. She held a trembling hand out to Kay and made him sit down beside her, and she spoke with an effort. It was an effort to understand her, but what she said, and that's the end of The Castle.